Okay, so what I want to do today is I want to actually show you how to use Excel to make both a bar graph and a multi-line graph. And I want to start with the bar graph first, just because it is a little bit easier. So I'm just going to go ahead and change the name to the sheet that I'm working on to the bar graph. And let's say that I wanted to plot um, the number of bacterial colonies that I grew on an agar plate um, that I swabbed off of a certain type of fomite. So let's say that we had 4 different fomites and we want to plot those on the x-axis. So whenever we do this, the first thing you want to do is you want to put the x-axis information always first. And in this case, it's going to be the fomites that we swabbed. And then I want to plot it against the total number of colonies on the y-axis. So on the y-axis, I'm going to just put y-axis in the second column and call it the total number of colonies. From there, I'm going to input my information. So let's say that we swabbed a phone, a computer mouse, a door handle, and a pen. And let's say that on the phone, we had 150 colonies. The computer mouse, let's say that we had 32. On the door handle, let's say that we had 17, and on the pen, let's say that we had 62. Okay, so now I have all my information input. Now I want to actually create a graph. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and pull the information, highlight all the information that I actually want on the graph. The x-axis and the y-axis information, that's more just for you. So you don't need to grab this first row up here, just the information that you want plotted. And from there, you're going to go to insert, and then you're going to choose the type of chart that you want. So in this case, once again, we're creating a bar graph or a histogram. So I'm going to go to this first one down here. It's a drop down menu. And if you actually hover over each one of those, it'll tell you what kind of chart it is. It's this first one here. And what I'm going to do is I usually grab the first 2D column. And once you hover on those different columns, you can kind of see how they end up plotting them. And what you want to do is you want to check the information that you see listed versus what your information actually gives in the numbers to make sure that it's plotted correctly. So I'm going to choose that first one. And so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure, okay, my fomites are definitely on the x-axis. The number of colonies ranges from 17 to 150. So I have those on my range here. And so that's the first part of it. The next thing that we need to make sure is that we actually have our axes labeled. So our x-axis is actually labeled because it's the individual fomites. The y-axis is not labeled, in which case we need to add an axis title. The way you do that is up here, you've got this add chart element. And the first thing, you can add an axis, you can add axis titles, you can add or take away chart titles, data labels, anything like that. In this case, all we need is just that y-axis title, and that happens to be the primary vertical title. So I didn't click on it yet, but you can actually just go through and hover. As you hover, it'll add. So we need that primary vertical one, and then from there, you can just go ahead and change the name. For us, remember, it's the total number of colonies. And then from there, you could technically add a chart title if you so desire. It's not necessary. I tend to do it just because it reminds me of what this actually goes with. So in this case, it's going to be the bacterial growth on fomites. And so now I've got my x-axis is all labeled with all the fomites. My y-axis is labeled. It gives me the right range. I'm double checking those bars just to make sure that it graphed it correctly. Once you're done with that, you can just copy the entire chart, just the picture of it, copy it and put it into the Word document for your specific lab that you're turning in. Now, a multi-line graph is a little different. And so all the graphs that you're going to do in here are going to be multi-line. So let's say that we were looking at the bacterial growth in 3 different temperatures over a length of time. And let's say that I told you that on the x-axis, I want you to label it with time. And then in the y-axis, I wanted you to label the growth. So basically the amount of bacterial growth. And so if you've got multiple lines, you're actually going to need multiple y-axes because usually the x-axis stays consistent. So in this one, we're going to say that we took a measurement at 0 seconds, another one at 1 minute, another one at 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and 15 minutes. So those are all the different, essentially all the different time frames that we took measurements at. And let's say the 3 different temperatures were 15 degrees Celsius, 25 degrees Celsius, and 35 degrees Celsius. Well, how do I want to make sure that it actually includes the symbol of degree? So if you go to the insert and go to the symbol, it'll actually give you the special characters, and one of those special characters is the degree symbol. So I'm going to go ahead and insert that at that 15 degrees Celsius, and then all I'm going to do is just copy that degree symbol and the Celsius and paste it into the other 2 columns essentially. So let's say at 15 degrees Celsius at 4 seconds, we got a total growth of 4. And when I say a total growth of 4, sometimes I give you a basically a table of measures. 0 means no growth, 4 is maximum growth. So let's say that we had maximum growth at that temperature and at 0 seconds. And let's say that 15 degrees Celsius really made no difference in the amount of growth. So we had basically 4 all the way down. Let's say at 25 degrees Celsius, we had 4, then 3, then another 3, then a 2, then a 1. And let's say at 35 degrees Celsius, we started off with 4 as well, went down to 3, 2, 1, and then we had no growth, which may be recorded as a negative. No growth just means 0. So now I've got the different temperatures and how much growth we had at each time interval. So what I want to do is I want to actually take those degrees as well as the time and the actual number. So I want to take everything except for the x-axis and the y-axis up top. And this time I want to do a line graph. So underneath our bar graph up here, when you go to the insert button, you'll actually see right underneath it is your line graphs. And the best way to do the line graphs is to actually make sure that they have the markers on them. So you'll notice these guys don't have the markers and they're actually stacked. This one's got the markers, and when I'm looking at it, the way that it's graphed, the lines do overlap, and that's okay, but it's showing me that those lines are actually accurate. So those are correct in terms of the amount of growth. So at 0 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 and 15 minutes, our 15 degrees Celsius should all be at 4, which is what we see. At 25 degrees Celsius, we had 4, 3, 2, and then, or 4, 3, 3, 2, and then 1. And then at 35, we went 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. So those are all correct. So that looks good to me. And then the reason you want to grab that 15 and 25 and 35 degrees Celsius is because it actually creates that legend for you down there. That's one less thing you have to do. So we have our x-axis labeled in terms of time because it went from seconds to minutes. So that's labeled correctly. That's not an issue. But once again, we don't have basically a label for the y-axis. So once again, you're going to go to the add chart element, go to the axis title, and this time, once again, you want the primary vertical. And that one is basically the amount of bacterial growth. So let's say that it's bacterial growth of, let's say that we use E. coli. And then from there, based on whatever your lab is, you can input a chart title. So for example, let's say that we were looking at the effect of heat over time on the growth of E. coli. So effect of heat over time on E. coli, make sure that is italicized, growth. And from there, you should be good. So now you've got a multi-line graph. So big thing with the multi-line graph, you're still going to put your x-axis first and your y-axis, but since you have multiple things, multiple temperatures or whatever it is that you're looking at, you're going to label each one of those y-axes and then put the information underneath it. And then you're going to basically take and select the entire chart except for the very top that says X and Y, and then you're going to plot it once again using the insert And using that line graph, once again, using basically that fourth option, it's the line with the markers. There are some other lines with markers, but you'll notice they're stacked and the numbers don't actually appear correct. So always make sure that when you're choosing your graph, that you're looking at the data to make sure that's actually presented correctly. If you have questions, you can always just shoot me an email and let me know. But this should kind of give you an overview of how to do both a bar graph as well as a multi-line graph.